date of birth is 7th September 1939. I was born in London. My name is Dennis Bonley, Dennis with two N's. I lived with my parents up to the time I got married, and I was born at the outbreak of war. So during the war, I lived with my grandparents and my mother in Petticoat Lane, while my father was in the army and my grandfather was in the Home Guard. I clearly remember the V2 rockets flying over when we got fed up going down the air raid shelters. And I clearly remember living in the air raid shelters when the alarm system went off. My mother's side of the family originated in Holland, but I don't know their history and it's too late to find out. My father's side of the family originated in Poland. Actually, it's on the border. It was called White Russia. And my grandfather, my father's father, moved to England in round about 1930. My father was already born, so he was born there. So that's the family history. I lived all through the war in Petticoat Lane. Immediately after the war, I moved also just about a mile into the East End, and then we moved again after my bar mitzvah at the age of 13. And that's when I joined Brady, which would have been about 1951-52. Where we lived previously was almost adjacent to Oxford and St George's, which was the other big club in the East End. And I had joined there but was not very happy there. But when we moved, I left Oxford and St George's because it was too far to go, when a neighbour suggested, why don't I join Brady? I had never heard of Brady. My parents were quite happy for me to go to a youth club, a Jewish youth club, predominantly. And the neighbour's son took me along to Durwood Street, a very small corner building, and enrolled me at the club. My first comment was, what do I do? And the next, I was told, you pay, I think it was 1 shilling and 6 old money in subs per week, and you had to do 2 activities. And I was a provisional member for a month before I got elected. So I went to the club. I did not do 2 activities. I played football. I did football training in a tiny gymnasium. And the instructor had great pleasure in belting the ball as hard as he could as we circled round the gymnasium. The month ended and I went for an election in front of the cabinet, and I'll explain to you what the cabinet is perhaps later in the conversation. They asked me what I'd been doing, I explained, and then I became elected. It was a very tiny building, Durwood Street, and it was spread over ground, first, second and third floor. The canteen was the main hub on the ground floor near the entrance. The gymnasium was in the basement, and then you had a table tennis room, you had a committee room, and the top floor was the snooker room. And the snooker room was continuously smoke filled with people with cigarettes over their ear while they played snooker. I really enjoyed life there, and I became friendly with boys as I then played football and became a member of the team. The thing that struck me at the time was every evening, at the end of the evening, which was 10:30, at 10:15 we had an assembly. That was taken by the club leader, who you probably become aware of, Yogi Mayer. He did a very small list of announcements, and then we said a prayer, a traditional Jewish prayer. which really goes Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and that's always said in synagogue anyway. But that was it. But it reminded us that we were Jewish. That was it. It wasn't thrust down. That was all there was. I stayed in Durwood Street until it closed and moved on to Hanbury Street. I used to enjoy Durwood Street, but the facilities were basically very poor. Brady also had many activities, most of which were provided by LCC instructors. The local authority provided those instructors. So there was a football instructor, a netball instructor, a photography instructor, a woodwork instructor, and they used to come in one evening a week, and you used to go to the classes if you wanted to. The managers used to do social, or with the women, girls, there was probably beauty and makeup, discussion groups, and then after the instructors, you had voluntary managers who took the teams. So when the teams played in competitive games, the girls played netball, the boys played football or cricket, the managers were all voluntary managers. There was also tennis, which used to take place in Davenham Foundation School, which was literally around the corner. And there was table tennis teams, there was swimming teams. And the club used to be quite successful in many of the competitions. We used to get, on an evening, I would say, it was anything from between 100 and 150 members attending the club 4 nights a week, Monday to Thursday, not Friday because it's a Sabbath, not Saturday because it's a Sabbath. And on Sunday, there used to be socials. So besides the sports in the afternoon, there was dances and socials in the evening. An important aspect of the club, which should not be overlooked, was the Jewish religion. It was never pushed into your face. It was there. So, besides the very short prayer each evening at the end of the club evening, the festivals were recognised in a very nice way. There's the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, which normally coincides roughly at the same time as Christmas. It's known as the Festival of Lights. It carries on for 7 days, and you light an additional candle each evening. That was done in the canteen every year at Hanukkah for 7 days. You then had at Passover, which is another important Jewish festival, you had what's called a Seder evening. It's a special evening of prayer and food in a pleasant way. And because many parents did not follow that, it was open to club members to attend a Seder service at the club, free, and they did the service and they provided the food. And if I may just interject myself by saying, there was a manager at the club named Monty Richardson. He was not a manager in the normal sense of taking sports, taking activities, etc. He was, without being a rabbi, he was a religious man, and he took all the services at camp. On Saturday morning there was a service for about 30 minutes, and he took that. At not holidays abroad, there were no service, but at the festivals at the club, Monty Richardson took the service, and he acted in many ways as a religious advisor to the club and the members without forcing himself on you. The club started with play centre, speaks for itself, very young children. From there you moved to the minors. Minors were age 6 to 12 and they were a section of the club. You then became a junior member between the age of 13 to 16. You then became a senior member, 16 to 19. Over 19 you moved into Old Boys Association. But there was also Parents Association, Friendship Club. The Friendship Club, self-explanatory, it was for pensioners. I attended Friendship Club on a few occasions because we used to pick some of the people up that lived in Petticoat Lane but couldn't make the journey to the club. So we used to pick them up on a rota basis and take them to the club and then take them home again afterwards. I have to say, unfortunately, it was 95% women, but I suppose that's how it is. And they used to have as well a party at Hanukkah in the afternoon, because they used to attend club from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. The cabinet. The cabinet was on the basis of government. The boys elected a captain and a vice captain, junior and senior. And they had cabinet members who were elected. And once a month, the cabinet met. They were the members. And their recommendation went to the club leaders or the club managers. The club managers, they were all voluntary. They met once a month, a committee with a chairman. And the managers basically were the social interaction between adults and children and young adults. The executive who raised funds and did important work for the club. And for example, the chairman was a man called Frank Austin, who was chairman of Austin Suite, a public company. We had another, Michael Cohen, and he was from the 600 group. And we had Bob Kemble, and he was from Kemble Pianos. And they did a very important job, and they always turned up at club shows. Frank always came to camp, and they did a very important job. The one thing on the side I haven't mentioned is the Brady Scout Troop. And the great tragedy is the scout leader throughout my time at the club, he unfortunately passed away in 2 dog. But he was the scout leader of the Brady Scout Troop. So that basically was the structure. I think it's fair to say Brady was their life. Without it, what would they have done? Roamed the streets, maybe got into trouble, and quite a few boys did end up in trouble anyway. There were no facilities as there are today. There were just no facilities. It was post-war, immediate post-war. There was nothing much to do. Brady provided your whole life. It provided social activity, sports activity, arts. There was art classes. We did art exhibitions. There was, as I've mentioned, photography, woodwork, discussion groups, shows. We had shows, awards nights. Anything a young person would have wanted, Brady provided. And it goes to show that now, some 60, 70 years later, many of us remain friends. Many of us still remain friends. And while we were using skeet, the Jewish New Year, the old Bradians had a weekend at skeet, or a few days at skeet. There was 50 people. Unfortunately, many of them now passed on. There were 50 people who were all old Brady members in the same era. And my circle of friends, all Brady people. I never retained any school friends, although I was very friendly with many of them at school, many of my classmates. But all my friends in later life were Brady people. And it's just the way it was. You lived with them. You spent nights at the club. You did activities with them. You were at skeet with them. You were at camp with them. You were at holiday abroad with them. And I don't think it can be measured, the benefit that it provided to boys and girls. I can only speak obviously with the boys, but you just can't imagine the benefit. And look how many marriages took place between Brady boys and Brady girls. I don't know the number, but I venture to suggest that all through it was happening. So you've now got people that have had 50 years of marriage. They married at Brady. You probably had 40 years of marriage, 30 years of marriage. They all met and married a Brady member. So that was very, very important, I feel. Parents are made very welcome. Very welcome. If I can talk to you, when I was a manager, I knew many parents, many parents. And they always used to, sometimes they used to phone. If there was a problem with a child, they phoned. They came along. If you asked a parent to help with anything, they were there. I could phone a father 12 o'clock, 12:30 on a Sunday, and say, I need you to help me with the team. They were there. And it happened all the time with parents. Awards nights, parents came. And I think the whole family was involved, became involved with the club. When you're that age, a young age, you don't appreciate how it impounds onto family life, but it does. And I think most parents are grateful that their children went there. And a lot of the parents then joined the Parents Association, the Old Boys Association, and even they were at the Friendship Club, grandparents. I only found out a few years ago that my grandmother was in the choir of the Friendship Club. I never knew that. She never mentioned it to me when I was very young. And I never even asked, I never even knew about the club at that stage. But the photograph came, and I'm looking at the photograph and I'm thinking, that's my grandmother. And she was on the stage singing it with the choir. So important. I am concerned about my grandchildren, and their sporting activities are well covered. Facilities that exist today for youngsters with sport, leisure centres and teams, etc., they abound. And there's no reason, if a youngster wants to participate, why they cannot do that. But there's no social interactive. And I'm concerned because I have two granddaughters, and I wonder where, they're at school, but that's very limited social interaction. If they're lucky enough to go on to college or university, that may change, I don't know. But if a youngster leaves school today as a teenager, there's nothing for them. Whereas the club provided that. It provided it from the age of play centre till old age. If you wanted to use it, it was there for you. Today that doesn't exist, and I think it's a great pity that clubs have disappeared, but they have. Computers, coloured television, mobile phones, that's what they're interested in. And that led to a great deal to the demise of the club and demise of Brady. Because when it moved out of the East End up to North West London, the youngsters there did not have the same attitude. They had more money, their parents were able to afford more. They used to go holidays abroad. Holidays abroad were unknown to us. If it wasn't for Yogi taking us on a holiday abroad, we never would have known anything about it. So, no, I'm concerned today that clubs do not exist. And if they do, there are too many strictures surrounding them. They can't do this, they can't do that. They mustn't do this, they mustn't do that. Everybody's there to criticise. Some kid takes part in something and falls off somewhere, newspapers there, the television's there, and therefore club leaders are frightened to do anything, if there were such an animal today, and I don't think there are. So, I know it's very easy for someone of my age to look back and say the good old days, but I think for a youngster, immediate post-war England had far more opportunity than it does for a youngster today.